Hey everybody, Huck here, and today we're going to talk about shutter speeds and what shutter speed should you be using. So before we get into that, I want to explain kind of my streaming setup and everything that kind of you see around you right now. I spend a lot of time on dressing this set and working and figuring out angles and figuring out lighting and finding things that I like and I dislike, and I work really hard on figuring out camera settings and a bunch of stuff. Like, for instance, it's not the best television to put on screen if you're filming. It's very old and you kind of can start seeing the pixel lines in it if you look real closely, and the edges are starting to go out because how it's lit is it's just an old TV. Also, you can find this little reflection here on Frank next to me. I don't really like it. I'm going to change it. A lot of this stuff I'm going to change. I have a red light that really doesn't illuminate the areas that I want it to. And there's some things about my setup that I like. I like the soft lighting. Maybe it could be a little bit brighter on my face, but honestly, it's okay. The only reason why I think it should be brighter is because how bright that TV is. Like I said, I have things I need to fix. One of the things that I really like, especially when it comes to streaming and kind of the cinematics that goes into it, I like the little, you see the little glow on me, the little rim light. I love rim light, and I love the fact that it separates me from the background and it kind of pulls me away. It's an easy way to just add a little bit of touch and a little bit of quality to your videos. Just don't go all 90s on it and put it everywhere, and I probably do that in my stuff. I tell you that to tell you this. I care a lot about what goes into my streams and the cinematics that go into it. I care a lot about it. I care about it so much that I spend probably more time set up than I even do streaming, which is probably why you don't see me streaming a lot. Quality is very important to me, and I know that I have a personal taste, and we all have personal tastes, and I think that should be taken into account for. But when it comes to shutter speed, there is a rule that has been used for a very long time. A lot of streamers you'll see use 60 frames per second FPS in their streams, which means that there is 60 frames within a second in the video that you see. More frames, normally the smoother the image is, the more crisp. The more pleasant. I mean, if you've ever seen a streamer stream at 15 frames a second, you'll understand. Streaming at a higher frame rate is pretty good. 60 is kind of where everyone's at. You can stream at 30, and please, if you have a computer that can't stream at 30, or even if you need to stream at 24 or something like that, do with what you have. Content is really a lot more important half the time because, I mean, the beginning of YouTube pretty much proved that. So shutter speed is the amount of light within that frame that you'll receive. So the normal rule for shutter speed is whatever your frames per second is, you double that for the shutter speed. I kind of want to question that right here. Because I feel like if you go by that rule, a lot of times you're going to lose out on some quality in your videos. Now, you might ask me, how you losing quality when it's a rule of cinematics? Because it has an old term used way back when we used film cameras for a modern digital age. Now, some of the things kind of translate, and we'll get into that. But for you, we're going to hit this more for streamers and everyone that streams. So we're going to start at 24 frames a second or 25, depending on where you're at. So 24 frames a second, if you're going to film at 24 frames a second, shoot at 50 shutter speed. Use the rule at 24. The reason why is at 24 frames a second, there's a lot of blur for 24th of a second. A lot more than you would think, and it's unnatural. So what about 30? Yeah, we're getting a little bit closer to questioning things, but at 30 you need to be shooting more than 30th of a second. 50 or 60. Normally the rule would say 60, so 60 is fine. 50 I still think is possible. It's a weird shutter speed for that, and a lot of math people and OCD people might have a little issue with it, but it's not bad. But follow the rule, 60 is fine. When we get to 60 frames a second, this is when I start kind of changing things up on you. A lot of people say if you shoot 60 frames a second, you should do 120 shutter speed. Actually, 125, because apparently cameras don't like 120 and don't want to do it, and just forget it. I'll rant about that later. So here's where me and the rules kind of diverge paths. At 60th of a second, that's quite fast, and you're already getting natural blur, and you've already shot other formats with the same type of blur. The amount of blur has not changed per frame. Now, what I will say is if you're not going to slow that footage down for like streaming, for stuff like this, if you're not going to slow that footage down, keep it at 60th frames a second. This is being filmed at 60 frames a second at 1/60th of a second for shutter speed. And I think it looks fine. I mean, it doesn't. Is there too much blur for you? Because 125th of a second is going to look like this. As you can see, I've only changed the shutter speed, and I've lost a lot of light in my image. Now I could edit some of this up because I have a nicer camera, but I really shouldn't have to. So, as you can see, when you film at 125th of a second, at 60 frames a second, you're losing a lot of light. So why is there this rule that you should double your frames per second for shutter speed? Well, when you shoot 60 frames a second, normally you're going to slow that footage down to about 50%. That's where it's very important to have a higher shutter speed. Normally when you slow it down, you're filming something at a different speed than you're normally viewing it at. So there's going to be a lot more motion that you're going to notice. So you double the shutter speed to take down of the slow motion blur because it won't look crisp at all if you do slow motion. But if you're not doing slow motion, why worry about it? Why take out the light? You're going to have normal blur at a normal speed. Don't do it. So unless you're doing slow motion, don't worry about it. Now, streamers, is there an opportunity for you to use slow motion on this? Yes. There's replays, there's stuff like that. And if you have your face, you should be doing this. Now, I haven't seen a lot of people do it, but I think replay is awesome. I think people should start doing it. But if you're streaming at 60 frames a second and you're doing a slow motion, technically you should be filming the replay at 120 frames per second and then having double that on top of it. Because then you're not streaming at 60 frames per second. Then when you slow down 60 frames per second, you'll have 30 frames per second. Now, do I think that's necessary? No. If you're streaming at 60 frames a second, you do an instant replay for 30, there's going to be people that might complain, but come on. I don't know anyone's computer that can actually render and do all that work for 120. And then you'd have to, on top of that, like I said, on top of that, double it. So you'd be doing 240. Do cameras do 240? Do 240, 250 or whatever the shutter speed that the camera lets you do, even though, never mind. I'm not going to get into that because, point that I'm making is if you're streaming at 60 frames per second, have a shutter speed of 60 frames per second. I'm doing it right now, and I bet you're not dying. If you're filming at 30 frames per second, do 50 or 60. It's fine. You're not going to notice. You're still going to have this type of blur. I hope this helped you out. If you want to see more videos, put something in the comments below. Talk to me. I don't know. It's the first time I'm doing this, and hopefully it goes over well. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye!